So I have a question. So this is the classic. Puts us on the spot, and then we kind of like crawl away. But so this is our proposal for our next action, which we're kind of kicking around right now, and it's to have a gathering, and then a people's assembly, which we've seen you guys do, and then from there, you know, I don't really know how we do it, but like normally we do a march and then we do an act of civil disobedience, and there's talk of filling in our big XR symbol because half the symbol's gone, but half the symbol's there, so it's there's an excitement to like fill it back in and bring the XR symbol back in. It's a 30-foot mural, um, and that would be risking arrest. But there's this situation, right, where like we're going to have a people's assembly possibly to decide what we're going to do on the spot. And you know, I guess we'd be spoiling the whole experience if we knew ahead of time what we were going to do. So one, I would ask, you know, do you think this is a good idea? Like, I know sometimes you're more of a fan of having a small group of people do something, or take command. But you know, the democratic process, there's got to be something for that as well. And then two, if we do have it, you know, it have the people's assembly, and I don't know, what do you think?
Well, you know, if I did my conventional mobilization talk, which, you know, you've probably heard before, I'd be going, you know, there's a power law curve of commitment, right, which is immutable, right? It's, you never change it. You're never going to get 90% of people to go to prison, right? So what you're going to get is 500 people you know, 500 people signed the petition, you know, 100 people turn up to action, 20 people get arrested, and 2 people go to prison, right? So you see that curve. So, you know, you can mess around with those numbers, but it has that basic relationship. So the you know, the utilitarian analysis is all of the above, right? Because your total accumulated power to change the world is the area under the curve, to be a bit mathematical about it. So I'm not sort of suggesting necessarily that, you know, you stop doing all the stuff you're doing, right? But in terms of turbocharging or revitalizing the movement in Portland, the people at the top of the curve have a non-linear effect on that curve, right? In a way that no one else along that curve will. You know, if you get 500 people to sign the petition rather than 300, it's not going to have much of an effect, right? But if 2 people go to prison and then they do a talk, you know, 4 or 5 talks around Portland, then you'll get 20 people turn out, let's say. Maybe you'll get 50, because that's how human emotions work. It's like, I'm going to go and see person X because they've stood up. And it's like action equals 1,000 words routine, right? So, so you know, there's the whole micro psychology of, you get everyone to the action, and then, you know, people go and go, oh, I'm not going to get arrested, and then they get swept along with the tide, as it were, and end up sitting in the road and getting arrested. So there's that side of it, which sounds useful. But without beating around the bush, like, you know, what I'm trying to suggest is, at this stage of the game, when you've been going for a year, that, you know, without sounding too pressurizing, I'm sure there's a few of you who are considering stepping up, right? Just out of frustration. And dare I say it, this is pretty deterministic, right? It's happened in Australia, it's happened in the UK, it happens in all social movements. A small, like happened with the Freedom Riders, right? There's only so much you can do over 2 years without going, okay, so what else can I do? And we all know what else you can do, which is you can go and alter property, as the euphemism goes, and you can keep doing something. So the ways in which you get arrested is by doing more high-powered actions and repeating it every day. So that's the way to get arrested. And if you do it often enough and you do it high enough, then they'll put you in prison, of course, right? So, you know, that's, you know, we can talk about the micro design of it a little bit if you want, but I think it would be useful for some of you to say more generally where you're at with the theory and where you're at personally, you know, in terms of the practicalities of finding people who are prepared to be arrested and or go to prison. Because once you've made that decision, of course, in principle, then most people still don't do it because they don't have the practical support. And one of the things I always forget when I'm doing my little talks, because I'm a bit of a bloke, is about the emotionality of support, right? You know, and this is enormously important. So instead of sitting on this call going, you know, like a cost benefit analysis, economic man sort of type thing, you should be doing, how can we create a community of support which will enable one or two of us to go to prison? You see what I mean? And that's practical support, it's emotional support, it's spiritual support, right? So what we're doing in the UK is, you know, people come to, you know, hear my little strategy routine, and 90% of people go, yeah, I'm into it, but they don't actually sign the piece of paper because they've just got that little block, and that little block is the emotional and practical support. So then they've got to find out who's going to do that emotional support and who's going to look after their dog and look after their kids. You see what I mean? Because at the end of the day, let's face it, that's the main problem here, right? I mean, you know, you may want to give me a hard time about this, but, you know, going to prison for a week in the US, as far as I can see, is, it has a degree of risk, but it's not, you know, it's not El Salvador, right? It's not Cairo. And it certainly isn't Parchment Prison either. So really, it's a question of, you know, going through some process of being part of a community, and you're going to prison as an expression of that community rather than as an individual. Anyway, so I'm going off point there, Will, aren't I? But, you know, I'm trying to keep us on track on the main argument, as you might say.
So I guess another interesting idea is that locally there's a frontline action with what is being known as the bomb trains. These trains that come through, they're called the bomb trains, and you know, there's been already an Extinction Rebellion action that was arrestable that happened a few years ago. And people are thinking about, you know, there might be an opportunity to gear up for another action in a couple of weeks. What do you think about this as opposed to, you know, the mass mobilization? Like, is this viable? Is this going to hit on the heartstrings of people? But because the normal everyday person I talk to on the street doesn't even know this thing exists. Like, they don't know what Zenith is. Like, you know, 9 out of 10, maybe 19 out of 20 might not even know that we have these oil trains that are coming through our city and shipping crude oil overseas in the billions of
Yeah, well,
tons.
look, if 20 people get arrested in Portland, 95% of people in Portland aren't going to give a shit, right? It's not, you're not even on the foothills of creating social change, right? What you need to think about is the strategic probability analysis. That's what you need to be thinking. You need to think strategically, in the sense that what can you do which will lead to something else, which will lead to something else, which will lead to something else, right? That's where you're at. You're in prison at the moment, right? You need to get out of that prison. You need to think about it, okay? And this is the mechanism that I'm suggesting, which is 2 people go and get arrested, and that encourages 20 people to go arrested, and 2 people go to prison. And those 2 people that go to prison encourage 20 people to go to prison. And when 30 people or 40 people go to prison in Portland, then you'll get on the news. And then you'll attract 500 people to a meeting. And then it will be radically non-linear, right? So what's really depressing is you have to do this maybe for a half a year, 3/4 of a year, and no one gives a damn about you, right? Because you're at the bottom of the curve. And then there's a tipping point, as there always is in social dynamics. And then suddenly all hell breaks loose and everyone's interested in you. You know, like the freedom, you know, everyone has to read, right, the history of radical political change, because you need to understand how this works, right? I'm not making this stuff up. You know, it's like the same pattern happens over and over and over again over the last 5,000 years, right? Human beings are fundamentally the same in all, you know, in just situations, right? They ignore it, they ignore it, they ignore it, and one day they go mad and overcome the regime. And that's how history works. So, you know, there was a Freedom Riders episode in 1947, right? Fantastic guys. They went down, they got beaten up, they got arrested, and you know what happened? Absolutely nothing. So that's a bit of a downer, and it took them 12 years to organize the next one, right? So, you know, I know we live in the internet age, but, you know, it's like you've only done 2 years. So what you have to be in for this for the long haul. And what you have to keep doing is continually pressing that button of the 10 or 12 or 15 of you, you know, upping the ante. And for the first stage of the process, it's all about influencing the people around you, literally around you, right? You know, like Michelle might go to prison, and then Mende might decide to go to prison. You see what I mean? But Mende won't go to prison until Michelle goes to prison. You know, no pressure and all that, but you see how it works, right? It's a bit like, it's like you're under a spell, right? The human psyche is always under spells. It's like, and then the spell breaks, right? And you see the world anew, and you go, oh, that's what fear is. It's a spell, and we're all under that spell. I'm not moralizing, you know, we're all subject to it, you know, we're only human. But it's like once that fear goes, like in civil rights movement, you know, there's this slogan, you know, the fear has gone, right? The fear has gone. That's why thousands of kids went to prison, right? Because the fear had gone. But, you know, that's no help at the moment, because obviously you're full of fear because it's scary. So what I'm trying to say is it doesn't matter, well, right, what the people go to prison for, particularly, because no one, 95% of people in Portland aren't going to be bothered at this moment. But what it's going to enable you is to consolidate that community of resistance in Portland, and then enable you to go to the next step. And once you get to the third step, then people might start getting interested, right? I mean, having said that, like, it would be, you know, there's the whole point about there's the whole point of doing something which is about the climate emergency, rather than, you know, doing bad things to bad people. But that's a relatively minor argument, I would say. You see what you're familiar with that?
We could still get the demands in there if they interview us. We can still say what our demands are.
So,
Yeah.
I had a question about that, Roger, because I think we could use some more guidance on it, which is, you know, the XR idea of targeting the government as opposed to targeting the bad guys, the banks, the oil companies, that kind of thing, which seems so obvious. That seems like the obvious thing to do, especially because these places are private. So it's much more easy to get arrested, right? All you have to do is just like mess with their private property and they'll arrest you. So the government, you know, sometimes the connect is a little more vague for people, right? Like, oh, what can the mayor of Portland really do about the climate crisis, right? So can you say something about how to frame the actions? Why aim them at government, and how to make that make sense to people?
Well, I'm not sure it's more difficult to get arrested, you know, painting the mayor's office as it is painting, you know, a big bank's office, right? Both are criminal damage with lawful excuse, as they say in the UK. So I would question that, but maybe you're right. And also, the reason why you're going towards the state and local government is, again, strategic, right? It's the thing about strategic arguments is they're very difficult to convince people of, but in the long term, they pay off. You know, it's a bit like citizens' assemblies, right? I mean, the easy return utilitarian analysis would be to go for a specific demand, wouldn't it, right? Like the environmental movement has been going for specific demands, like, oil company X does Y, right? So why did Extinction Rebellion say citizens' assemblies? Because strategically, makes a lot more sense. And in the long term, that's what builds a mass movement. You don't build a mass movement by doing easy stuff. You're doing stuff that's right and makes strategic sense. So, and the reason why going for the state makes strategic sense, although it's a difficult argument to make, is the state has a monopoly of violence, as they say in the literature, in the sense that it can enforce the will of society upon the merchant class. That's the traditional political theory. So, before 1990, was the focus of most politics, was on getting governments to do stuff. And obviously that's coming back into fashion a little bit. As you can see with Biden, there's this realization if the state doesn't act, then we're all dead, right? Because, there's too many companies and all the rest of it. And if Portland government makes a law, then it applies to everyone. You don't have to go around each bad guy. You can make a law and all the bad guys have to straighten up their act all at the same time. I mean, there's other more complicated arguments around it. But I would suggest that it's not, I mean, I could be wrong here, but I would suggest there's plenty of mileage in going after the Portland government anyway, because of a feeling of betrayal around the climate emergency in Portland, that the state and city government isn't stepping up. And there's good arguments for making a specific demand of the state government or of the Portland government. But that's a debatable point. But what's not debatable, as you might say, is this mechanism of high-level civil disobedience galvanizing a movement that's in the doldrums, as you might say. But, if you want to go and do a train line, go and do whatever it takes, right? The main thing's go and do it.
I think Mendy's next.
Yeah, so I went to the No More Oil Trains press conference and speak out. And there were 12 so-called the most active organizations in Portland that were standing against oil trains, and the signs all say, "I stand against oil trains," and the buttons on the table say, "I stand against oil trains." And I'm thinking, wow, this is awesome. I've got my umbrella. I'm out in a park. I'm going to listen to some really amazing speakers talk about this. And there were doctors representing and immunologists and an indigenous group, and the Columbia Riverkeeper, which was the main organizer, and an Extinction Rebellion offshoot, XRPDX was there, but no one spoke from there. And I asked, when I finally got a chance to ask, they were like, "Hey, do you want to say anything? We're making a little video about everything today." And I said, "Yeah." And so they said, "You just say who you are, and then you say, why you're there, and you use these words." And they had a script of I stand against oil trains because, and I'm relevant because, basically, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, okay, so which line are we going to stand on against the trains? This one or that one? And there was dead fucking silence. And I'm like, you're going to have to put your body on the tracks they were asking people to please make phone calls and call these fucking representatives in the city because the contract with Zenith is about to be renewed. And our idiot mayor wants to just go ahead and renew it now that Commissioner Fish is dead. And Commissioner Fish is the only guy that was holding it off and staving it off with 1 year, 1 year, 1 year, 1 year permits. So it's a really easy breakdown of what is happening right now within city government right now here in Portland. And so what I told my husband, who's the full-time canvasser and mobilizer for XR here, is let's do an action somewhere around the, where they just say literally, here we are, we're physically use their fucking logo even and say, I stand against the trains. Look, I'm standing against the trains. Come and stand with me. Who's going to stand with me? And it was kind of too radical an idea for the people that were having that meeting. And out of all of their 12 different organizations doing call outs and come on out and hear everybody talk and we're gonna get involved, there were maybe 70 people there, and most of them were organizers or speakers. So that's what I wanted to say, Roger.
Yeah. Well, you've put your finger on the button, right, of what the psychological dynamics are, which is most, at a time of existential crisis, most activism is displacement activity, right? I mean, that sounds brutally unpleasant thing to say, but it is, because no one believes it's going to work. And that's why most people don't join it, right? So it's I show my age and culture, but it's basically an escape from Coldit's structure, right? Which is, you can lobby the guys in the death camp and it feels good, but they're still going to shoot you, or you can run for the fence and almost definitely get shot, but have a chance of escape, right? And most people choose the former, even though it's irrational in a reductive sense, right? So that's not how human nature works. That's because I'm just nerdy about it. But how human nature works is someone that's more emotionally motivated, as you might say, like you are. And I'm not making any judgments, right? I'm just saying you are. And you're one of those free groups of people, right, that say this is wrong, right? Full stop. And you go and sit, you go and stand on the track. And that's how history is made.
Or in the city council chamber. Sounds like yeah, they wouldn't like that.
But what I'm trying to say is there's a beautiful simplicity about it, isn't there? Right? Like most political people are far too sophisticated for their own good, right? They don't see the wood for the trees, right? Something bad happening, then go and stop it, right? That's pretty basic. How do you stop it? You go and stand on the line, right? That's the name of the game, right? That's why Extinction Rebellion became the most powerful civil, climate movement in 12 months. There's no big mystery about it. It said, this is so fucked, we're going to have to go and get arrested. And it was like, oh, at least someone said so at last, and so you've got loads of people going, this is actually credible. So this is the paradox, right? The central paradox of mobilization, which is that the guys that do the thing that's most scary actually mobilize more people because they're actually credible. You see? I mean, do you want to go and spend, your Sunday afternoon standing on a platform hearing, do you want to stop the railway, by people handing out leaflets and using their vocal cords, right? It's not really very clever. You might as well be watching Netflix. But if someone says, look, I'm going to go and stand on the railway and stop it, obviously 70% of people are going to go, that's far too scary, I don't even want to think about it. But at least 30% of people are going to go, actually, that's credible. And if I can find someone who'll walk my dog for a week, I'll go and do it. You see how it works? So it's like, you've got different personality structures in a social system, right? And what you need to be appealing to is the other 20 people in Portland, what I call like lone wolves, right? They're not connected to any particular political or philosophical orientation. but they're sitting there going, when something is actually real, I'm going to join. I'm going to join in. So by you standing on the railway, you know, you're going to mobilize those next 10 lone wolves, either within the people on this call or within XRA Portland, or quite possibly someone will get in touch and say, I saw Mende, you know, standing on the railway line. That's so brave. And I cried all night about it. At least something's happening now. And I'm going to come down to your meeting and I want to know what we're going to do. You see what I mean? And it changes the whole atmosphere of the space, right? From this sort of symbolic going through the motions, when are we going leafleting again, you know, blah, 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 through to this high octave sort of, right, this is it, you know, sort of feeling. And that's why, you know, your homework is to go and read about the American Civil Rights Movement for the next 6 months, right? 10 hours a week, because that's what drove the Civil Rights Movement, right? It was people going, I'm not standing for this any longer. You know, absolutely. You know what I mean? There's nothing symbolic about it. It's an intensely emotional and spiritual state of mind. There's nothing superficial about it. I mean, it's scary stuff, right? You know, but you know, the beauty of it is it massively improves your life because you start living a real life. And, you know, that's what life is about, according to the virtue ethics tradition, isn't it? Is, do you live in fear or do you live, you know, in the spirit of what it is to be a human being and all that stuff? So is that the plan then? Let's wrap up in 5 minutes.
I have a few exciting things to share, I guess, or just kind of things that I would like to speak to really quickly. Is that, you know, as you were speaking, and then one other person before, what really stood out for me is this reality to where much of the population just doesn't actually understand what is real. You know, like saying we stand for the train, but they're not actually standing there. They're just saying they're standing there. And so, and, you know, you spoke to symbolism as well. And you know, I study symbolism because I study cultural anthropology. And so I actually believe that symbolism is one of the most powerful ways that we can draw eyes and, you know, support for the cause, because it triggers something within the human brain so deep and so primal that people look. And yeah, you know, I think I want to let you wrap up, but I actually have, you know, 2 separate ideas, one of which I've been working on solo for a while, in terms of actions that I would like to take. And also, as you were speaking about, you know, these trains, which I actually was not aware of, I'm lacking a lot of, you know, just the statistics and scientific knowledge that I would like to have. And, you know, as you were speaking about that, I was just like, more ideas and more things. So hopefully there's a time once you wrap up that we can talk more about that. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's, yeah, we should never like juxtapose the material and the symbolic, right? Like all action has a symbolism, and material resistance is massively symbolic, right? So it's not if someone stands in on a railway line, there's massive symbolism of that, right? You know, like the guy in Tiananmen Square, right, in front of the tank. You know, there's a deep symbolism around the vulnerable individual against the forces of evil, right? It's a ancient archetype. So I'm not don't think that I'm against symbolism, right? I'm just trying to, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm just trying to get the job done, right? I'm just an empirical social scientist. So if we can change the world by flying flags in front of, you know, Portland Town Hall. Fantastic, let's do it. You see what I mean? I'm not on some big trip about people going to prison or anything. I mean, people say that sometimes about me, but I'm not, right? I mean, whatever it is, right? So what I do want to say is if you want to get a little bit sophisticated about it, is there seems to be perennial dynamics in human societies around notions of sacrifice and truth telling, right? Which and there's myths within all cultures where someone steps up and says the truth and is sacrificed for saying that truth. And that mechanism revitalizes the moral fabric of society, broadly speaking. And I think the reason why you have these perennial myths is because it's necessary, because societies are always degenerating, because, you know, why step up against injustice? You know, why not have a quiet life, right? So you've always got that churn of periods of sacrificial heroism, as you might say, and periods of degeneration. So, I mean, obviously it's more complicated than that, and there's lots of nuance. But what I'm trying to say, I guess, is my understanding on the basis of my observation, and obviously it's theoretically informed as well, is that sacrificial resistance to injustice is the key determinant, right, of galvanizing social movements. That's what I'm saying. And the added sort of agony of our situation, as you might say, is what we face at this period of history is not a linear problem, right? You know, the civil rights movement was a linear problem. You know, there was segregation in the South, but it wasn't getting exponentially worse. You know, and slavery was a linear problem. It was an obscene, you know, transgression of all human values, but it wasn't getting exponentially worse. The thing which keeps us up at night, or should be keeping us at night, is we don't actually have a lot of time here, right? You know, at a certain point, it might have been 5 years ago, it might be in 6 months' time, it might be in 5 years' time, right? Doesn't really matter. This thing is going to spin out of control if there isn't a global movement of resistance to tame the forces of capitalism, evil, whatever you want to call it, right? So, you know, I'm always, because I'm always trying to be nice, because, you know, that's how I was brought up. I'm always agonized about saying to people, what's, you know, the really horrific reality, which is there's going to be indescribable suffering in America and around the world if the 500 people in the world don't actually step up, which creates a massive pressure. But that's the truth of the matter, right? You know, and I hope you realize I'm trying to be honest rather than horrible to you all, right? But that's basically what I'm asking you to do. You know, I'm asking the 12 of you, the 11 of you on this call, to go away and think about your responsibilities at this point in history, you know, as a living being in an infinite universe, right? What's going on for you? What's important? And then go and think about the practicalities, right? Which are deeply finite, right? You see what I mean? You know, you're not going to your deaths, right? You're not going to lose anything permanently necessarily. In fact, you've got loads to gain if you want to be empirical about it. You know, go and read about what happened to the freedom riders in Parchment Prison, right? It was the most important experience of their lives. It gave them a massive psychological, emotional, and spiritual maturity. So there's massive plus sides to this sort of activity. So, you know, that's what I would ask you to do on behalf of, you know, my kids and the next generation, is go and have a meeting and say, you know, go around and have a go round and say, where's each person at? You know, is there someone who can step up and go to prison for a fortnight? What support do they need, right? You know, and someone says they can't, then fine, you know, there's no judgment, right? At the end of the day, everyone's soul is sovereign, right? And all that business. But someone has to have the courage to actually ask the question, because that question is the pathway to our salvation without being too dramatic about it. So sounds a bit, you know, doesn't sound like a NGO chat, does it?
No, you missed the NGO press conference, Roger. It was really a lively crowd.
Yeah.
I said, let's get a desk and just let's write our Congress people, but why don't we just get a desk and some office chairs, put them on the track, and then write the letters?
I just ordered a, geez, what is it? It's the judge's hammer, the gavel. Yeah, it's on the way.
Well, Monday, you organised a meeting, right? You know, it's like no, you know, no pressure. People turn up, and the question to ask yourselves is, if I was good to do it, you know, this routine, if I was to do it, what would happen and what would need to happen? That's a really interesting question, right? You know, I mean, everyone in this call has had periods of your life where you've been going, should I, shouldn't I, right? You know, with really big decisions. And I don't know if anyone's done that, but it's really powerful. Is you say to yourself, well, if I was going to go to university, or if I was going to get divorced, or if I was going to marry that person, or if I was going to move away from my, you know, all those questions, right? If I was going to do it, then what would happen? And it's massively empowering, because once you've gone through it, all your fear starts to subside a little bit, because you go, okay, so I was going to go to prison with Mende, so, you know, I'd have to make sure I get a chair. I'd have to have a chat with Mende to make sure she's sane. I need someone to, you know, look after my kids. I'm going to have to go and talk to my boss. I'm going to have to do some research on how nasty prisons are in Portland. Okay, so you've got a checklist, right? So you haven't decided to do it yet, but it's a project then, rather than an amorphous, overpowering fear. And you look into that list, and then you might go, oh no, I can't do it, which is fine. But at least you've looked into it, right? And someone else might look into the list and go, actually, you know, if I might be able to do this if I get enough support. And that's the way, you know, that's the process I would suggest. Do it as a community.
Add things to the list.
You could add all sorts of things.
12 organizations that are all local, and asking people to call the same representative over and over again and have a silent vigil in front of some meeting that's coming up. And I just thought, well, what if we were to actually notify all of those organizations and say, congratulations, this is what we're going to do. We stand against oil trains. We're going to physically do it. So get the fuck out here with us and do it, if this is really as important to your asses as you say it is. And then it makes every single one of those fucking NGO organizations look like what they actually are, which is greenwashed bullshit when nobody shows up. And I would have a fucking sign, and I would say, I'm here on behalf of Columbia Riverkeeper, because no one in this organization seems to understand that you actually have to stand for the fucking thing that you're saying you stand against. You're going to actually do it. Even reading the list of everybody who called, asking, hey, can we get a list of how many people actually called Representative whoever the fuck? And then you could read their fucking names on a megaphone, and you could say, I'm out here because of the call that this person and this person and this person and this person made. And I'm completely serious. I was just like, it seems so simple to me, but it's because I live with my husband and he works with you.
Yeah. Well, you sound like one of the Freedom Riders, right? Being interviewed the day before they pop down to the South to do the business, right? But you should all watch, if you haven't watched the movie, then watch the movie, right? So it's called, everyone write this down. So it's the Freedom Riders, the movie. It's not that complicated. It's on YouTube. And it will make you cry. Well, hopefully it will make you cry, because it's like, oh my God, you know, it's exactly what you've just said, Monday, right? It's like they're all faffing around, and a bunch of people go, it's not that complicated. We just go on the bus and sit next to each other, right? You know, just do the fucking thing. You know, I mean, what's wrong with that? You know, and nothing was wrong with it. And, you know, 2 months later, it was like world news, right? So it's like, if you don't want oil to come into Portland or wherever, then sit on the rail track, right? It's not complicated, is it? It's like, just go and fucking do it. You see, and what will happen to you is 100th of what happened to those guys, right? So, America owes those guys a massive debt, a massive debt. And the next generation's watching you, right? It's your time. It's your time, isn't it? This is it. You're living on 100 years of massively courageous people that have made America, dare I say, a semi-decent place, right? It's gone a little bit downhill, we all know, but it's fundamentally a decent place. And that wasn't achieved through waving flags. It was really, it was through people risking their lives. And that's,
so Roger, we've gone 20 minutes over. There's another person who has a question, but I want to be respectful.
Go on, then we should finish, didn't we?
Yeah.
But we've got an action point. I'm trying to nail this down, Damien. We've got an action point. Mendy's going to organise a meeting, and she's going to do a little speech, and then everyone's going to have a go round, and everyone's going to go, and the question's going to be, if I was, what would I need to do? Okay, that's what I suggest, without wishing to be too proactive. Yeah, there's a last question then, and then we'll finish, shall we?
Yeah, Mary.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Okay, so I'm wondering, and I'm sorry I was a little late to get onto the call, so if you've already covered this ground, I will catch up with somebody else, but I am concerned with the fracturing of energy and divisions of good people who could work together. And specifically, I'm thinking right now about the social justice movement, especially in Portland, because there's been a lot of protests and activism and police interaction with protesters, so that I don't know if and how to factor that into our equation of what we're doing. I mean, one of the reasons I think why the police aren't arresting XR action participants is because they're not doing the more extreme actions that they've got something to compare us to, and basically we're not as bad as in their eyes as the other protesters. So anyway, and also I'm worried about the fracture of XR, and that's probably a big topic, but is there any way that we can all work together?
Well, the aim we have here is to change the world and save the next generation, right? And working together is a means of doing it. So the aim is not to work together. The aim is to save next generation, right? And the hypothesis is, if we work together, then it will achieve the goal, right? Which may or may not be correct, right? So let's just think about it like that, first of all. Okay, so there's two sort of logics, right? Historically, on working with other organizations. So the first logic, it's the one we're all familiar with, which is what we've had for the last 30 years, which is, if we all work together, then we'll be bigger and it'll be a lot nicer, and we'll all turn up together and we'll be more effective and we'll achieve our goals, right? So let's say, for the sake of argument, that's got quite a lot going for it, right? But we should be aware there's another logic historically, which is that we've been working for 30 years on a whole bunch of things that don't work. And it's false solidarity, as you might say, to work with a whole bunch of people who are suggesting a mode of operation which doesn't work. And therefore, the more that we work with them, the less successful we'll be. So I'm juxtaposing those two positions, not because I'm necessarily saying one's better than the other, but just to say that historically, those have been two logics, right? And sometimes one of the logics has been right, sometimes the same logic is right, and then 50 years later it's wrong, right? In other words, there's nothing intrinsically right or wrong about them. You have to do a situational analysis, right? You see what I mean? So like with the Freedom Riders, if all the civil rights movements were just talking about money and, you know, sending representatives to Congress, then it wouldn't be good working with them, right? Because you wouldn't get that galvanizing of the movement. You see what I mean? But on the other side of the equation, like if everyone's trying to get something done and they're about to get it done, and there's some extremists on the edge guilt tripping everyone and saying, we know the way, you know, blah, 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 then they're dysfunctional, right? So you can choose. So what I think you have to analyze, and obviously those are two extremes, what you have to analyze is on the basis of empirical evidence is what degree of solidarity and cooperation you want, right? On the basis of you know, what they're saying and whether what they're saying works or not. So I haven't got a detailed answer to that, but I want to say something else, which is one of the ways in which paradoxically you build respect and trust is not through a sort of false solidarity, right? It's through speaking the truth in action. So one of the reasons why I'm suggesting what you do tonight is because it gives XRA credibility, right? With people who are genuinely on the margins of society, as opposed to the people who claim to speak for the people on the margins of society, right? Because one of the criticisms of XR, which is partially valid, is there's lots of middle-class people going through the motions, right? So you're not going to be in genuine solidarity with the oppressed, classically speaking, until you join them in the actuality of being oppressed. So that's the challenge of going to stand on the railway line, right? So I would suggest there's two things to consider. One is a nuanced approach to other movements, you know, asking the question, is their mode of operation actually function at this stage in history? That's question number one. And question number two is, how can you actually manifest the resistance you say you wish in actuality? In other words, stop being hypocritical. And to the extent that you manifest that, you will find yourself naturally making alliances with the people who are more oppressed, right? As I say, as opposed to people that claim to talk to them. So that's the landscape. And I think, I mean, I haven't gotten an update on it, but I'm, you know, I could be wrong in saying this, but my general orientation in terms of the American activist culture is that the people that are going to be doing high-level civil disobedience are going to re-galvanize the solidarity ethos that has been lost. You see what I mean? You're not going to recreate that ethos through sitting in rooms pretending to agree with each other. And again, you can use the case study of the civil rights movement, right? Which is they're all being bitchy towards each other, right? In the way that the American activist scene is at the moment. And what brought them together was, to be brutally honest, is the willingness of people to die for the cause, right? Because that matured them, right? In other words, like the experience of social struggle, real social struggle, classically speaking, is what brings people together in real solidarity, right? Rather than, you know, stuff you write on Facebook. So that's a really hard message, right? I'm not, you know, which is what I've been saying in this call. So that's what I would orientate myself. I mean, a little micro thing here is what Will said the other day, was when you did that action in Portland, one of the XR people, the XR US people came to help, right? So why was that? It's because you were showing yourself to have guts. You see what I mean? Once you go out and show you've got guts, people will become the social justice, the genuine social justice people, right? As opposed to the people that are just going through a phase. right? The genuine social justice people will give you that, will start respecting you. Like in April 2019, like when 1,200 people were arrested, right? It was only then that we were invited to go and speak to community groups in London who were mainly working class people of color. And the reason why was because they were excited that we got shit done, right? You see what I mean? We were invited in because we had credibility. We weren't invited in because, you know, hey, you know, Roger's going to say some nice things about liberation. And I didn't give a shit about that stuff, right? What they wanted to know was, you know, how do they do direct action on their housing estate in order to get the rent reduced? Do you see what I mean? So, you know, that I'm not going to start getting more prescriptive than that, but hopefully that situates your analysis in a more, you know, concrete way.
Thank you. That's very valuable, extremely valuable. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. This has been, for me anyway, extremely helpful. I feel like sometimes we can kind of wander off into the weeds and lose track of where we were going. So this feels appropriately reorienting. So I guess we should let you go into your evening.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. I really don't take it for granted, you know, and feel free to sack me at any time, Damien, because I'm seriously only of service to you all. And at the same time, don't hesitate to ask me to come and, you know, waffle on again if you feel that would be useful, because I'm totally dedicated to you guys. And thank you so much for everything you do. It's, you know, it's enormously important work, right? And you know, beyond description, isn't it? So please care for each other, and, you know, and go to Menday's workshop, please.